Smile. Sebastian Matthews did not. The photographer lowered his camera and forced a laugh, but the ballroom had already gone too quiet. 200 guests stood under gold chandeliers, glasses raised, waiting for the future CEO of Matthews Pharmaceutical to put his arm around the woman he had been ordered to marry. Across from him, Leela Jenkins stood in a silver dress that was too elegant for a night that felt this ugly. She looked calm from a distance. Up close, he could see the truth in her eyes. She was furious, so was he. Victoria Matthews stepped forward first, voice smooth as silk. "Sebastian, the press is waiting. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Then Christopher, already half drunk, said it loud enough for the front tables to hear. "Come on, brother. At least pretend you like the merger." A few people laughed. Leela heard it. Sebastian saw the tiny change in her face. Not pain. Worse. Humiliation swallowed whole. Then Harold Jenkins's old attorney lifted a folder and said, "If either party refuses to sign tonight, control of Jenkins' research transfers at once to the interim board." That changed everything, because now this was not a wedding announcement. It was a public execution dressed as a celebration. Sebastian looked at the contract, then at Leela, then at the smiling people waiting to watch them bend. For the first time that night, he stopped feeling trapped. He started feeling dangerous. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low enough to make the nearest table lean in. "If they think we are signing blind in front of cameras, someone here has badly misunderstood me." The silence that followed felt like the start of a war. 3 nights earlier, Sebastian had not known Leela Jenkins could look at a room full of powerful people and make them uncomfortable without saying a word. He learned that the moment she walked into the private dining room his mother had chosen for their first meeting. No smile, no nervous small talk, no soft apology for the madness of the situation. She took one look at the long table, the family lawyers waiting at one end, and asked the question nobody else wanted asked. Why are there attorneys here if this is supposed to be dinner? That was the first moment he respected her. Victoria had tried to recover with some polished answer about family transparency and legal clarity, but the damage was done. The lie had cracked before the starters arrived. This was never meant to be a meeting between 2 adults. It was meant to be a staged surrender. Sebastian had stood then, pulled out the chair beside him, and told the lawyers to leave. His mother had gone cold. "Sebastian, sit down." "No," he had said. "If this is truly about the 2 of us getting to know each other, then it can happen without witnesses billing by the hour." He expected Leela to stay quiet. Most people did when the Matthews family decided something. Instead, she set her purse on the table, looked straight at Victoria and said, "I agree. Unless your plan was to let them explain which part of my life your contract owns." That was the second moment he respected her. The lawyers left. So did his father after one dark look that promised a future fight. Victoria stayed for 2 more minutes trying to control the room through sheer force of will, then finally walked out in silence sharp enough to cut stone. Only then did Sebastian and Leela sit down across from each other. For a few seconds neither spoke. Then Sebastian said, "This is worse than I expected." Leela let out one breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "That is exactly what I was thinking." He studied her carefully. She was beautiful, yes, but that was the least interesting thing about her. What caught him was the control. Her hands were folded. Her shoulders were straight, but he could see the strain in the way she held herself, like someone standing very still in the center of an earthquake. "I want to be clear," he said. "I did not agree to any of this." "Neither did I. My family told me this was about honoring my grandfather." She gave a small, bitter nod. "My grandmother told me refusing would cost her the company." That landed hard. He had known there would be pressure. He had not known it was built like a trap. Leela reached into her bag, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table. "Read page 4. He did, then read it again. The clause was clean and vicious. If Leela rejected the arranged union, Voting control of Jenkins' research moved to a temporary board due to an old succession condition tied to family continuity. It was the kind of clause rich old men wrote when they wanted to control people from the grave. Sebastian looked up slowly. "They are using your grandmother. They are using all of us." Something about the way she said it stripped the room of pretense. This was not romance, not legacy, not tradition. It was leverage. He pushed the paper back toward her. "Then we should refuse together." Leela's eyes held his for a long second. "Can you?" He hated that he did not answer right away. That told her enough. His family owned too much of his future. His board was already uneasy about him after months of fights over expansion, pricing, and succession. Christopher had been whispering in corners. Investors were restless. One public break with the Jenkins deal would not just embarrass the Matthews name. It could give his enemies a reason to move. Leela saw the truth on his face and looked away. "That is what I thought," she said quietly. It should have offended him. Instead, it embarrassed him because she was right. Dinner came and went untouched. They talked anyway, not politely, not like strangers pretending this might be charming one day. They spoke like two people trapped in the same fire, testing whether the other knew where the exits were. She told him about her work in genetic therapy. The way she described it was the first time he saw warmth in her. Real warmth, not social grace, not careful manners, passion. He asked questions. She answered without simplifying anything, which he appreciated. Most people talked to him like he was a title before he was a person. He told her about the company, about the pressure of inheriting a machine built by men who confused control with vision. He did not mean to say that much, but once he started, the words came easier than expected. By the end of the night, he knew three things. First, Leela Jenkins was much smarter than anyone in either family seemed to understand. Second, she did not trust him. Third, he could not blame her. Their second meeting was worse in a different way, not because they fought, because they did not. They met in a quiet coffee shop near her lab, away from family eyes. He arrived first. She came in 6 minutes later, carrying a notebook and looking tired enough to drop where she stood. He ordered for both of them after remembering exactly how she had taken her coffee at dinner. When he handed it to her, she paused. "You remembered." "I pay attention." She looked at him then, really looked at him like she was adjusting a conclusion. They spent 2 hours comparing timelines, names, legal pressure points, and family behavior. What started as forced courtship turned into something else. An audit, a map, a list of everyone pushing them toward the altar and every reason why. By the end, the pattern was impossible to ignore. This marriage was not just meant to unite two families. It was meant to quiet two inconvenient people. Leela because her research division was close to a breakthrough powerful people could profit from. Sebastian because he had been blocking a licensing deal inside Matthews Pharma that smelled rotten. Separate, they were manageable. Married, distracted, and bound by public image, they would be easier to control. When Leela said that out loud, Sebastian leaned back and went very still. "My brother has been pushing that licensing deal for months," he said. Leela closed her notebook. "Then maybe this marriage is not the prize." "No." His jaw tightened. "It is the leash." That was the first moment they became something close to allies. Not lovers. Not yet. The attraction was there, sharp and inconvenient, but buried under anger and strategy. What grew first was trust, slow and dangerous. So when the engagement party turned into a public signing trap, Sebastian was no longer standing beside a stranger. He was standing beside the only person in that ballroom who might understand the size of the lie. He looked at the contract again, then at Christopher, then at his mother whose perfect expression had finally cracked. Leela did not speak, but he felt the question in the air between them. What now? Sebastian reached for the folder. Not to sign, to close it. Then he faced the room and said, "Tonight is over. No signatures, no announcements. And if anyone here has been using this engagement to cover a deal they do not want me to examine, I suggest they start worrying." Across the room, Christopher's smile vanished. Leela saw it too. And for the first time since this nightmare began, her fear gave way to something harder, hope, because maybe they were still trapped, but now they were trapped together, and someone in that room had just made the mistake of pushing both of them at once. The ballroom did not explode into chaos. It froze. 200 people stood motionless under the chandeliers, glasses still in their hands, as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Sebastian Matthews had just shut the leather folder containing a billion-dollar merger contract in front of half the Seattle business elite, and he had done it publicly. Victoria Matthews recovered first. She stepped forward slowly, every movement controlled, the same way a chess player moves a piece after realizing the board has changed. "Sebastian," she said quietly, though the microphones from the press table carried her voice farther than she intended. "This is not the place for theatrics." Sebastian did not look at her. He looked at the room, at the investors, at the board members, at the reporters already whispering to each other, and finally at Christopher. His younger brother had stopped swaying. The alcohol fog had vanished from his eyes. Now there was only anger. "You are making a mistake," Christopher said. Sebastian tilted his head slightly. "No," he replied calmly. "I think I just found one." That single line traveled through the crowd like electricity. Leela felt every eye shift toward her. The room expected her to shrink, to apologize, to soften the damage. Instead, she lifted her chin. For the first time that night, she stepped forward beside Sebastian instead of slightly behind him. It was a small move, but half the room noticed. Victoria noticed. Christopher noticed. And most importantly, the reporters noticed. Leela's voice was steady. "If there are documents that require signing," she said, "they can be reviewed privately, with independent counsel." The word independent landed like a slap, because everyone in the room knew the Matthews family legal team had drafted the contract. Christopher let out a short laugh. "Oh, this is rich," he said. He walked closer, ignoring the tension spreading across the floor. "Let me guess," he continued. "Now the brilliant researcher thinks she is suddenly part of corporate negotiations." Leela did not react, but Sebastian did. His voice dropped several degrees. "Careful." Christopher smirked. "Or what?" Sebastian stepped closer, not aggressively, not loudly, but in a way that made Christopher realize something unpleasant. His older brother was not backing down. "Or you will remind everyone here why the board chose me," Sebastian said quietly. Christopher's jaw tightened. For years that rivalry had lived just beneath the surface of Matthews' family gatherings. Tonight it had stepped into the open. Victoria intervened before it went further. She clapped her hands once, sharp and decisive. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced smoothly, "it seems our young couple would prefer to complete formalities in private." She smiled at the press. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening." The orchestra resumed playing. People started talking again, but the tone of the room had changed. This was no longer an engagement celebration. It had become a spectacle, and every person present understood something important had just cracked. Sebastian leaned closer to Leela. "Walk with me." They moved toward the terrace doors before anyone could stop them. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet compared to the ballroom chaos behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Leela exhaled. "That went badly." Sebastian almost laughed. "No," he said, "that went honestly." She turned toward him. "You just humiliated your own family." "They started it." "That is not exactly reassuring." He leaned against the railing. Seattle's lights stretched across the water below. "Tell me something," he said. Leela crossed her arms. "What?" "Did you know about tonight?" Her eyebrows rose. "Of course not." "Because the contract was not supposed to appear tonight." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Sebastian tapped the closed folder in his hand. "This version is new." She stepped closer. "How can you tell?" "I read every clause when my father first showed me the draft." He opened the folder again and flipped to the middle. "Page 9. Leela leaned over his shoulder. The clause was short, but it changed everything. If the union between Matthews Pharmaceuticals and Jenkins Research is not completed within 30 days of public announcement, control of joint development patents will temporarily transfer to Matthews' Strategic Licensing Division. Leela read it twice, then a third time. Her stomach dropped. That would give Matthews control of my research. Temporarily, Sebastian said. She looked at him. Temporary control of a gene therapy patent could be worth billions. He nodded once. Exactly. Leela stepped back slowly. So this marriage is not just leverage. No. Sebastian's voice was calm. It is a transfer mechanism. For a moment, the only sound on the terrace was distant music from inside the ballroom. Leela tried to process the implications. If the wedding is delayed, she said slowly, Matthews' Strategic Licensing gains temporary authority over Jenkins' patents. Sebastian nodded. And guess who proposed that licensing division 6 months ago? Leela did not need to guess. Christopher. Yes. The pieces began sliding together, too cleanly, too perfectly. Christopher pushing a licensing structure, the sudden urgency of the marriage, the clause appearing only in the public contract. Leela's voice dropped. Someone expects this wedding not to happen. Sebastian closed the folder again, and they want control when it collapses. She looked back toward the ballroom doors. Through the glass she could see Christopher talking to 2 board members, laughing, confident, as if the night had gone exactly as planned. Leela's pulse quickened. If the engagement fails publicly. Sebastian finished the sentence. Christopher gets my job. And your company gains control of my research. They stood there in silence for a long moment. 2 strangers who had been forced together, now realizing the trap surrounding them was much larger than either family had admitted. Leela rubbed her temples. This is insane. Sebastian's voice turned thoughtful. No. It is strategic. She looked up at him. What are you thinking? He stared through the terrace glass again, watching Christopher, watching the board members, watching the machine that had been quietly moving pieces around both of them. Someone expects us to fail, Sebastian said. Leela followed his gaze. And if we do not? A slow smile appeared on his face. Then they lose everything, for the first time that night. Leela smiled too. It was not the nervous smile from dinner. It was something sharper, more dangerous. So, she said quietly, you are suggesting we ruin someone's plan. Sebastian turned toward her. No. I am suggesting we let them think their plan is working. She studied him. You want to play along. I want to see who benefits. Leela considered the idea. The scientist in her recognized the logic immediately. Observation before reaction. Gather data before acting. You are talking about deception, she said. Yes. And you expect me to trust you. Sebastian held her gaze. I expect you to trust the evidence. For a moment, neither moved. The ballroom lights reflected off the water behind them. 2 reluctant partners standing at the edge of a much bigger game. Finally, Leela nodded once. Fine. But if this backfires? It will not. You sound very confident. He shrugged. I run a pharmaceutical company. She raised an eyebrow. And I run a research division. A pause. Then both of them laughed quietly, because for the first time since this nightmare began. They were not reacting anymore. They were planning. Behind the terrace glass, Christopher raised his champagne glass again, smiling like a man who believed victory was already secured. Sebastian watched him carefully and said the one sentence that made Leela realize the night had just changed direction. If my brother wants a show, Sebastian said softly, then we are going to give him one. The next morning, Seattle woke up to headlines. Not about love, about conflict. Matthews air halts engagement contract at public event. Corporate merger drama shocks Seattle elite. Jenkins research marriage deal faces questions. Sebastian read the articles from the back seat of his car while the city moved past the tinted windows. Most of the reporters had been careful with their language, but the implication was clear. Something inside the Matthews empire had cracked. His phone buzzed for the 23rd time. He ignored it. Across town, Leela was reading the same headlines from the small break room inside Jenkins' research. Maria stood beside her holding a mug of coffee. "You did what?" Maria asked. Leela did not look up. "We delayed signing." Maria blinked. "You embarrassed half the Seattle business community." Leela finally set the phone down. "Yes." Maria stared at her for several seconds. Then she smiled slowly. "I am proud of you." Leela laughed quietly. "You should wait until the consequences arrive." Right on cue, her phone rang again. "Grandmother." Leela stepped into the hallway before answering. Her grandmother's voice came through sharp and controlled. "Tell me this is not as reckless as the news makes it sound." Leela leaned against the wall. "It is exactly as reckless as it sounds." Silence, then her grandmother sighed. "You found something." Leela closed her eyes. "Yes." "Something big." "Yes." Another pause. When Leela Jenkins spoke again, her voice had changed. It was no longer worried. It was calculating. "Then you had better finish what you started." Leela smiled faintly. "I plan to." Across the city, Sebastian walked into Matthews' pharmaceutical headquarters knowing the day would not be quiet. It was not. The moment the elevator doors opened, he saw 3 board members waiting outside his office. Christopher stood with them, looking relaxed. Sebastian walked past them and opened his office door. "If this is a meeting," he said calmly, "it should happen inside." The 4 men followed him in. The door closed. Christopher spoke first. "You embarrass the company." Sebastian removed his jacket and hung it on the chair. "I delayed signing." "In front of investors." "In front of reporters." Christopher's smile tightened. "You made the company look unstable." Sebastian sat down slowly. "If our stability depends on rushing billion-dollar agreements without review, we have bigger problems." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Sebastian, the issue is timing." "Yes," Sebastian replied, "it is." Christopher leaned forward on the desk. "You are risking the Jenkins partnership." Sebastian folded his hands. "Interesting." Christopher frowned. "What is?" "You seem very concerned about the Jenkins partnership." "I am concerned about company strategy." Sebastian opened a drawer and slid a document across the desk. Christopher glanced down. Then his expression froze. It was a copy of the new contract clause, temporary patent control. Christopher looked up again. His tone had cooled. "So?" "So," Sebastian said quietly, "I am curious why that clause appeared in the version distributed last night." Christopher said nothing. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Sebastian continued. "The clause transfers temporary authority over Jenkins' research if the marriage collapses." Christopher leaned back. "Standard legal protection." "Is it?" Sebastian tilted his head. "Because I checked." He tapped the desk lightly. "And it did not exist in the previous version." Now the room was silent. Christopher's eyes hardened. "You are implying something." "I am asking something." Sebastian leaned forward. "Who added the clause?" Christopher shrugged. "The legal team." "Which reports to the licensing division." "Yes." "And who proposed the licensing division?" Christopher smiled again. "You are reaching." Sebastian leaned back. "No. I am narrowing." One of the board members spoke nervously. "Sebastian, perhaps this discussion should continue later." Sebastian stood. "No. It should continue right now." He walked to the window overlooking downtown Seattle. "I built this company's current strategy for the last 5 years." He turned back to them. "I know every department, every deal, every licensing structure." His gaze landed on Christopher. "So if someone thinks they can quietly move a clause into a contract and I will not notice. He paused. They do not know me very well. Christopher's jaw tightened. You think I am sabotaging my own company? Sebastian's voice stayed calm. I think someone expected the engagement to collapse. Christopher laughed once. Why would I expect that? Sebastian walked back to the desk slowly. Because you have spent the last 6 months telling anyone who will listen that I am unfit to run the company. Christopher said nothing. Because if the engagement fails publicly, Sebastian continued, investors panic. He placed both hands on the desk, and when investors panic, he let the sentence hang. Christopher finished it for him. The board considers leadership alternatives. Sebastian nodded. And if Jenkins' research temporarily falls under Matthews' licensing control? Christopher's eyes flashed. Sebastian finished the thought. Then the person running that licensing division suddenly becomes very powerful. The room felt smaller. Christopher stared at him. For the first time, the confidence was gone. Only anger remained. You are imagining conspiracies. Sebastian smiled slightly. Am I? He slid another paper across the desk. Christopher looked down. His face went pale. It was an internal memo, one he had written 3 months earlier. The subject line was simple. Strategic opportunity if Matthews-Jenkins merger destabilizes. Christopher looked up slowly. Where did you get that? Sebastian shrugged. I run the company. The board members exchanged worried looks. Christopher stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. He moved toward the door, but Sebastian spoke again. You are not leaving yet. Christopher stopped. Sebastian's voice had changed. It was colder now, harder. You tried to turn my engagement into a corporate ambush. Christopher turned slowly. You cannot prove anything. Sebastian met his gaze. I do not need to. He paused. I only need time. Christopher's expression darkened. Sebastian finished calmly. And thanks to last night. He tapped the desk again. I just bought us 30 days. Across the city, Leela was finishing a call with her research team when a message appeared on her phone. From Sebastian, meeting tonight, we are being watched. She stared at the message, then replied, by whom? His answer came 30 seconds later, probably my brother, possibly others. Leela looked through the glass wall of her lab office. Researchers moved between equipment. Normal life continued, but the ground beneath everything had shifted. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. We need to assume someone wants this marriage to fail. Leela typed back slowly. Then we should not fail. A pause. Then his final message arrived. Exactly. Leela looked down at the engagement ring still sitting loose on her finger. 3 days ago it had been a symbol of obligation. Now, it was bait, and somewhere in Seattle. Someone was waiting for it to break. By evening, Seattle's skyline glowed under a thin layer of rain. Inside a quiet corner booth of a waterfront restaurant, Sebastian Matthews sat with his back to the wall. Old habit. He liked seeing the entire room. Leela arrived exactly 2 minutes late, shaking droplets from her coat before sliding into the seat across from him. Neither smiled. Not tonight. You picked a place with too many windows, she said. Sebastian glanced at the reflections behind her. That was intentional. Leela followed his gaze. Across the street, a black sedan had been parked for 20 minutes. She raised one eyebrow. You think that is them? I think, Sebastian said calmly, someone wants to know what we do next. The waiter arrived. They ordered quickly, nothing complicated. Once the man left, Leela leaned forward. Your brother. Possibly. You sound unsure. Sebastian folded his hands. Because Christopher is ambitious. He paused, but he is not patient. Leela understood immediately. So someone else wrote the long game. Exactly. Rain streaked the glass behind them. Seattle traffic crawled slowly along the street. Leela rested her elbows on the table. Let us review. Sebastian nodded once. You go first. She began counting on her fingers. 1. Someone added a clause transferring temporary control of Jenkins' research. Correct. 2. That clause only activates if the marriage collapses. Yes. 3. Your brother benefits from both outcomes. Sebastian nodded, but... Leela tilted her head, but Christopher is loud. Yes. He drinks too much. Yes. And he is terrible at hiding things. Sebastian smiled slightly. So you agree? She leaned back. This plan is smarter than him. A quiet moment passed. The implications settled between them. Leela spoke again. So who benefits more than Christopher? Sebastian exhaled slowly. The Matthews board. Leela frowned. All of them. No. Sebastian tapped the table lightly. 2 members pushed the licensing structure hardest. Which ones? Alan Pierce. Leela nodded slowly. Investment banker. And Victor Hale. Leela's eyes sharpened. The patent lawyer. Exactly. She sat back, and both would profit from controlling Jenkins' patents. Sebastian nodded, massively. The waiter returned with their food. They both ignored it. Leela lowered her voice. So their plan is simple. Yes. Push the marriage. Yes. Let it collapse. Yes. And quietly collect control of my research. Sebastian looked directly at her. Unless we do something first. Leela studied him carefully. You already have something in mind. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the table. Leela opened it. Her eyebrows rose. A joint announcement. Yes. She read the headline. Matthews Pharmaceuticals and Jenkins Research announced strategic development partnership. Her eyes widened. This bypasses the marriage clause. Sebastian nodded. If both companies form a direct research partnership, the patents remain protected. Exactly. Leela kept reading, then she looked up again. You wrote this today. 3 hours ago. She shook her head slightly. You move fast. I had motivation. Leela closed the document. There is one problem. Sebastian waited. She said it plainly. Your board will block this. Yes. And mine will panic. Probably. She leaned forward. So how do we get both sides to agree? Sebastian smiled. We do not. Leela blinked. What? We force them. She stared at him. I am listening. Sebastian lowered his voice. Christopher thinks we are going to fail. Yes. The board expects the same. Yes. So we give them exactly what they expect. Leela's eyes narrowed. You want us to fight? Sebastian nodded, publicly. Leela leaned back slowly. That would convince them the marriage is collapsing. Exactly. And while they prepare to activate the clause, we sign the partnership. Understanding flashed across her face. They will not see it coming. Sebastian nodded. They are too focused on the wedding. Leela let out a quiet breath. This is insane. Yes. She stared at the rain sliding down the glass. Then she smiled slightly. I like it. Sebastian finally picked up his fork. You have not touched your food. Leela laughed softly. Neither have you. For the first time that night the tension eased, but only slightly, because both of them understood something. They had just decided to start a war. Across the street the black sedan's engine started. Sebastian noticed. So did Leela. She glanced toward the window. They are leaving. Sebastian nodded. Good. Why good? Because it means the show has already begun. Leela watched the car disappear into traffic. Then she looked back at him. You realize something. What? If this goes wrong. He finished the sentence. You lose your company. And I lose my research. Sebastian met her gaze. Then we make sure it does not go wrong. Leela studied him. You trust me very quickly. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. You stood in front of 200 people last night and refused to bend. He shrugged. That tells me enough. Leela smiled faintly. And you shut down your own family in public. Someone had to. They both fell quiet for a moment. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Leela spoke again. There is one more problem. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. What? She looked straight at him. We actually have to convince everyone we hate each other. Sebastian smiled slowly. That will be difficult. Leela smirked. Why? Because, he said calmly, I do not. Leela held his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them. Then she looked away first. We should probably start rehearsing. Sebastian nodded. Tomorrow. She stood and grabbed her coat. Where? He stood as well. At the one place the press will absolutely see us. Leela paused. The Matthews board dinner. Sebastian smiled. Exactly. Outside, the rain had started falling harder. Leela pulled her coat tight as they stepped into the night. Neither spoke as they walked toward the curb, but both were thinking the same thing. The people who set this trap believed they understood the game. They believed Sebastian and Leela were pieces on the board. They were about to learn something different. The pieces had started moving on their own. The Matthews board dinner was never meant to be quiet. It was designed for power. A long private room inside the top floor of the Harbor Tower restaurant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, crystal glasses, white tablecloths, 8 board members seated like judges around a polished table. And tonight, 2 guests everyone expected to watch break apart. Sebastian arrived first. He did not sit. Instead, he stood near the windows, scrolling through his phone while the board members spoke in quiet clusters. Conversation stopped the moment the elevator doors opened again. Leela stepped out. Every head turned. She wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, nothing soft. Her posture was calm but distant, the way someone stands when they already know they are not welcome. Perfect. Sebastian glanced up. Their eyes met for half a second. Then both of them looked away. The performance had begun. Victor Hale, the patent lawyer on the board, stood first. Miss Jenkins, he said smoothly, we were not sure you would attend. Leela walked into the room slowly. I almost did not. The tension rose instantly. Alan Pierce leaned back in his chair. After the engagement incident, I imagine things have been difficult. Sebastian spoke without looking at anyone. They have. Leela crossed the room and stopped at the opposite side of the table from him. Sebastian and I have different views about how this arrangement should work. Several board members exchanged looks. Victor Hale folded his hands. Perhaps we should begin dinner. Sebastian shook his head. No. All eyes moved to him. He finally looked up. I think Miss Jenkins wants to say something. Leela met his gaze. There was a flicker of hesitation. Then she turned toward the board. I believe the engagement was a mistake. The words landed hard. Alan Pierce raised an eyebrow. That is unfortunate. Sebastian's voice was sharp. You think? Leela faced him. You refused to sign the contract. You wanted me to sign without review. Because that is how agreements like this usually work. Sebastian laughed once, and that is exactly the problem. The room had gone silent again. Board members leaned forward slightly, watching. Christopher sat near the end of the table, arms crossed, eyes bright with interest. This was exactly what he wanted. Leela spoke again, her tone colder now. Your hesitation damaged both companies. Sebastian stepped closer to the table. My hesitation protected them. Victor Hale intervened smoothly. Perhaps emotions are running high. Leela ignored him. Sebastian, we agreed this marriage was a business solution. And now you want to cancel it. She did not hesitate. Yes. Christopher's smile grew. The trap was closing. Sebastian slammed a folder onto the table. Then say it clearly. Leela did. I do not think we should get married. Several board members exchanged quick glances. Alan Pierce leaned forward. If that is truly the case, the Matthews board will need to consider the contractual consequences. Sebastian turned sharply. You mean the licensing clause? Victor Hale adjusted his glasses. A standard protection. Sebastian looked furious. Standard. Leela crossed her arms. You did not tell me about that clause. You did not ask. I trusted you. The words echoed in the room. Christopher almost laughed. Sebastian's voice dropped. That was your first mistake. The tension was thick enough to feel. Leela looked down briefly. Then she spoke again. If the marriage fails, Jenkins' research loses temporary patent control. Victor Hale nodded calmly. Only temporarily. And that benefits Matthews' licensing. Yes. Leela turned toward Sebastian. So that is the real plan. Sebastian did not answer. The board members watched closely. Everything looked exactly like a collapsing alliance. Alan Pierce cleared his throat. If the engagement dissolves, the board must protect shareholder value. Christopher finally spoke. Which means activating the clause. Victor Hale nodded. It would be unfortunate but necessary. Leela looked toward the windows. Seattle's lights reflected in the glass. Then she turned back slowly. Then perhaps we should end the engagement tonight. Christopher could not hide his satisfaction. Sebastian stared at her. You are serious? Yes. A long pause. Then Sebastian spoke quietly. Fine. The room shifted. Victor Hale leaned forward. In that case. Sebastian raised his hand. Before we finalize anything. He opened the folder he had slammed onto the table earlier. Inside were several copies of a document. He slid them across the table. Victor Hale frowned. What is this? Sebastian answered calmly. A partnership agreement. Alan Pierce picked up one copy. His expression changed. Matthews Pharmaceuticals and Jenkins Research. Leela finished the sentence. Have entered a direct joint development partnership. Christopher stood up. What? Sebastian folded his arms. This agreement bypasses the merger clause. Victor Hale read quickly. His face turned pale. If both companies share development authority. Leela nodded. The patents cannot be transferred. Christopher slammed his hand on the table. You cannot sign that without board approval. Sebastian looked at him calmly. I already did. The room went dead silent. Victor Hale looked up sharply. When? Sebastian's voice was steady. This afternoon. Leela reached into her purse and placed a second document on the table. Jenkins Research signed as well. Christopher stared at the papers. You planned this. Sebastian smiled slightly. Yes. Alan Pierce's voice was tight. You staged this argument. Leela nodded. You were supposed to see it. Victor Hale slowly leaned back in his chair. Realization spread across his face. You wanted us to activate the clause. Sebastian answered quietly, so we could expose it. Christopher looked like he might explode. You set us up. Sebastian's voice hardened. No. You set yourselves up. Leela stepped forward. For weeks you pushed this marriage. Sebastian continued. You added a hidden clause. Leela finished, and you expected us to fail. Christopher looked around the room, but no one was defending him now. Board members were reading the documents again. Understanding what had just happened, Sebastian spoke one final time. The clause no longer matters. Leela added calmly, the partnership protects both companies. Victor Hale rubbed his forehead. You just destroyed a major licensing strategy. Sebastian shrugged. No. I protected two companies from being stolen. Christopher said nothing, for the first time in years. He had lost the boardroom. Leela glanced at Sebastian. Their eyes met briefly. No smiles, not yet. The war was not finished, but the first battle had been won. No one spoke for nearly 10 seconds. In a boardroom, 10 seconds can feel like a year. The Matthews directors stared at the documents spread across the polished table. The partnership agreement was simple, clean, legally airtight. Matthews Pharmaceuticals and Jenkins Research would jointly control development and licensing of any genetic therapies produced by Leela's division. No transfer clause, no temporary authority, no loophole. The trap that had been quietly waiting for the engagement to fail had just vanished. Victor Hale set the paper down slowly. You bypassed the licensing division completely. Sebastian nodded, correct. Alan Pierce looked up from the document, his voice tight. You understand this removes a major profit channel. Leela answered calmly. It removes a major vulnerability. Christopher was still standing. His chair sat pushed back behind him like it had been abandoned mid-battle. You manipulated the board, he said. Sebastian looked at him evenly. You manipulated the contract. Christopher's voice rose. You embarrassed this company. Sebastian leaned forward slightly. No. You tried to hijack it. Silence again, but this time the silence felt different because the board members were no longer watching Sebastian and Leela. They were watching Christopher. Victor Hale folded his hands. Christopher, the memo Sebastian showed us. Christopher's jaw tightened. You are taking that out of context. Alan Pierce spoke next. You wrote about destabilizing the engagement. Christopher did not answer. Leela watched carefully, then she spoke quietly. You expected the marriage to collapse. Christopher turned toward her. You were never going to last. His voice carried a bitter edge. You barely knew each other. Sebastian answered before Leela could. That was the point. Christopher laughed once. So what now? Sebastian did not hesitate. Now the board decides whether attempted corporate manipulation should have consequences. Christopher's expression hardened. You cannot prove intent. Victor Hale looked down at the memo again. We do not need proof beyond reasonable doubt. Alan Pierce added quietly, this is not a courtroom. Christopher looked around the table, one by one. The directors avoided his eyes. That was the moment he understood. The game was over. Sebastian stood. I am recommending Christopher Matthews be removed from leadership consideration within Matthews Pharmaceuticals. The words landed like a hammer. Christopher stared at him. You would destroy your own brother's career. Sebastian's voice stayed calm. You tried to destroy two companies. Christopher looked ready to argue again, but Victor Hale raised a hand. The motion will be reviewed. Alan Pierce nodded. In the meantime, he looked at Christopher carefully. You should step away from licensing operations. Christopher said nothing. His eyes burned with anger, but the room had already shifted away from him. He grabbed his coat from the chair and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped beside Sebastian. You think you won. Sebastian met his gaze. I think you made a mistake. Christopher leaned closer. You still married the girl they chose for you. Sebastian's reply was quiet. No. I married the woman I chose. Christopher left without another word. The door closed behind him. The boardroom felt lighter immediately. Victor Hale exhaled. Well. Alan Pierce rubbed his temples. This evening did not go as expected. Sebastian finally relaxed his shoulders. That was the idea. Leela glanced at him. You could have warned me you planned to recommend his removal. Sebastian shrugged. You handled it well. She smirked. I'm a scientist. I adapt. Victor Hale stood. I believe the partnership agreement deserves careful review. Sebastian nodded. You will find it beneficial. Alan Pierce added quietly. It also protects Matthews long term. The board members gathered their papers and slowly filed out. Within minutes, the room was empty. Only Sebastian and Leela remained. For the first time all night, neither of them had an audience. Leela leaned back in her chair. Well. Sebastian looked at her. Well. She let out a breath. I cannot believe that worked. It almost did not. She raised an eyebrow. Oh. Sebastian smiled faintly, for a moment at the beginning. He hesitated. I thought you were actually angry. Leela laughed. I was. Partially. He shook his head. You are very convincing. You should see me during grant negotiations. They sat quietly for a moment, then Leela spoke again. So. Yes. What happens to the wedding? Sebastian leaned back in his chair. That depends. On what? He looked directly at her. On whether you still want to marry me. Leela studied him carefully. The tension of the evening faded slowly from her shoulders. You know, she said thoughtfully, a few months ago I thought this marriage was a trap. Sebastian nodded. So did I. She smiled slightly, but tonight something interesting happened. What? We stopped being victims. Sebastian smiled. Yes. She stood and walked toward the window overlooking the bay, city lights reflected in the dark water. Sebastian joined her. For a moment they stood side by side in comfortable silence. Then Leela turned toward him. I think we make a good team. Sebastian nodded. I was thinking the same thing. She looked at the engagement ring on her finger, then back at him. So maybe the real mistake our families made. She paused, was assuming this was only a business arrangement. Sebastian's voice softened. And what do you think it is now? Leela held his gaze. I think it might be something better. Sebastian reached for her hand, not as part of a strategy, not for the board, just because he wanted to. You realize, he said quietly, our grandfathers probably thought this would happen. Leela laughed softly. I refuse to give them that much credit. He squeezed her hand. Fair. She stepped closer. So, CEO Matthews. Yes. Are we still getting married? Sebastian answered without hesitation. Yes. Leela smiled. Good. Then she added one final line. The kind people repeat later, the kind that ends stories. We started as a deal someone else arranged. She squeezed his hand. But everything that happens next. Her eyes shone with quiet certainty, is our choice. Sebastian smiled, and for the first time since the entire mess began, the future finally belonged to them.